Okay, I do believe we are live. I'm ready to rock and roll. Forbidden fruit. Our 5th episode on the Etrog. And in our previous episode, we talked about the Etrog that came from a tree that was worshipped, an oracle. We talked about a forbidden city, an Ir Hanidachat. And the truth is that the same halacha applied to the lulav, that's the palm branch, even more so, as we learned, and we'll touch upon this in this new episode as well. The lulav has a shear. It has a formal size that it has to measure up to. Whereas the etrog doesn't actually have a shear. It doesn't actually have a formal size. And the reason that it's problematic when you have an etrog which is destined for incineration is that you don't have an etrog. Not that it doesn't measure up, but you don't have what we call a fruit. Torah deems this fruit slated for destruction to be a non-entity. What we're going to learn about tonight is unique to the etrog. Only the etrog of the 4 kinds can have this question, issue, or problem. Because only the etrog is a fruit. The palm is a branch, and what we'll learn about tonight is not applicable to branches. And the myrtle and the willow, these are twigs. Once again, NA, not applicable, or irrelevant. But when it comes, however, to a tree with fruit, we have an issue. And so, shalom everybody. It's good to see you joining. If you're on Facebook and you'd like to hop on to YouTube so you can ask questions, you're welcome to do so. So let me just, before we start learning, we're studying the Gemara from the actual text, I want to introduce you to a couple of verses that are found in the book of Leviticus in chapter 19, as well as the words that our sages shared about the very verse, because it serves kind of as a background, in case you haven't heard about this. Leviticus 19, verse 23. It's in Parshat Kedoshim, and if you were reading the Torah in Shul, it would be the beginning of the 3rd reading. V'chi tava'u el ha'aretz. So when you will come to the land, unetatem kol eitz machal, you will plant a fruit-bearing tree. V'araltem arlato et perio. You're going to block off its fruit for 3 shanim, for 3 years. And then, only b'shana haraviyit, in the 4th year, that fruit is called Kodesh Hilulim, and it is sacred fruit. We sing Hashem's praises over it. It's brought to Jerusalem. A long story, but not for tonight. So the Torah says that the first 3 yields of the tree can't be eaten. And in the Torah Kohanim, and we have almost verbatim the same Gemara in Masechet Pesachim on page 22, the Torah says that these fruits, lo ye'achel, shall not be eaten. So our sages say, ein li elo shalo ye'achel. When the Torah says you shouldn't eat it, I know consumption is forbidden. Minayin shalo yitzba. How about benefiting? For example, using it to dye wool. Shalo yehaneba, finding any other kind of benefit other than consumption. So, would that be permissible? And the answer is, lo yehenebo, one is not permitted to benefit from it. Lo yadlik bo saner, one cannot extract oil and use it to kindle a lamp. How do we know this? Because it says, va'araltem arlato, you'll block off its blockage, arelim, that which is totally blocked off and sealed off from you, l'rabot et kulam. So, with that little preface, now you have an understanding of where our Gemara is going to start from. If you're following along in the text, which I of course encourage you to do, we're going to be on Daf Lamed Hey, page 35 of Masechet Sukkah, and we're kind of smack in the middle of the page. In our previous episode, we talked about the Etrog that is verboten because it comes from an idolatrous source. Now, the Gemara continues to analyze the words of the Mishnah. And the words are that V'shal Orlo, that which comes from these 3 years, the first 3 yields of the tree, Posel, is disqualified. It doesn't enable you to fulfill the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Why can't you do a mitzvah with a fruit that's orla? Now, allow me to explain. You don't want to eat the fruit, and you don't really want to benefit from the fruit, because we have this concept, which is mentioned multiple times in the Talmud, mitzvot lav lehonot nitnu. The commandments that God gave us were not given for our personal enjoyment. If somebody thinks that he or she is going to do a mitzvah because it's fun, or rewarding, or touching, or meaningful, and that becomes their raison d'etre, this is why they're doing the mitzvah, they're not worshiping or serving God. They're worshiping or serving themselves. There's a beautiful, poignant story of a fellow who once came to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, and he lamented that he had this terrible problem. And Tzemach Tzedek said, what is your issue? And the man said, I detest studying Torah. I just can't stand studying Torah. And, it bothers me because a Jew is supposed to study Torah, but I don't enjoy studying. And Tzemach Tzedek's response was, that's a problem. That's a solution. My problem is I love to study Torah. So in order for me to serve Hashem, I have to study Torah when I'm near the point of exhaustion, when I actually no longer enjoy the Torah study, and then I have to push myself to study Torah. Otherwise, it's a pleasure. For you, every time you open a sefer, you crack open a book, you're already serving Hashem. It doesn't mean we shouldn't delight in our mitzvahs. We should. We should feel good about serving Hashem. And there's nothing wrong, in fact, there's something right with being passionately and joyously engaged in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. However, if the reason you fulfill the mitzvah is because you enjoy it, then what happens if one day you don't enjoy it? Let's say you find keeping kosher very rewarding. Sure, until the day that you're stuck somewhere and don't have any kosher food and are very hungry. Is it still enjoyable? The simple answer is no. Oh, so you don't keep kosher that day? Because it's not enjoyable? Oh, I love observing Shabbat. And what happens when it becomes difficult to observe the Shabbat? Then you stop observing it. So it's self-understood that inasmuch as we should develop and nurture a passion and a joy for mitzvahs, mitzvahs are not given for our personal benefit. Mitzvahs are acts of subservience and commitment, love and devotion to God. We should see ourselves as privileged to have been created by God to serve God. As the Mishnah says, Ani, I, you, all of us, Nivreti, we were created, L'sham eshet koni, to serve our master, which is God, which is Hashem. In fact, the Mishnah says, Lo Nivreti, I was not created Elo, only to serve Hashem. So if you do things that are enjoyable or take a vacation, it's not because when you're doing those things you're not serving Hashem, it's because that's how you're going to best serve Hashem. Because the average person needs to have a holiday once in a while in order to maintain equilibrium. Otherwise, he or she becomes irritable and frustrated. And very few people can continue to work at full tilt. So that would be not an act of disloyalty to Hashem, but on the contrary, that would be an act of avodat Hashem. There's a beautiful story told that one of the great Polish Hasidic masters, he would hardly eat. He would eat on Shabbat. He would literally pick at a little bit of food. He would literally hardly eat a whole week. And obviously he was very thin, and he wasn't in great shape. And somebody once said to him, Rebbe, you have to eat a little more. You have to be healthy. And this tzaddik said to him, he said, believe me, I would eat. I find it so difficult to eat properly, which means for a holy and higher purpose, that it's easier for me not to eat. It's more painful for me to eat. Now you have to be like a real tzaddik on that level. He said it's very hard to do it right. But that's what we strive for. We strive to serve Hashem. We strive to be able to perform mitzvot for God's sake. So the fact that you can't eat this etrog shouldn't be a problem. The fact that you can't benefit from the etrog, personal benefit, shouldn't be a problem. Because this is neither fit for consumption nor personal benefit. It's a mitzvah. And this is the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, my time. What's the reason for this? And the Gemara's answer, very interestingly, Yehuda says that's interesting, studying while feeling tired. I just want to tell you something, Yehuda, that oftentimes when I start teaching a class, I'm very tired, but I'm usually energized by the time I finish. So I find that studying Torah and teaching Torah gives you strength. Anyway, so the Gemara says, my time, and the Gemara says there's actually a dispute about this. Pligiba. Our sages had a dispute about why Arla shouldn't be used for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah of the Etrog. And the dispute was between Rabbi Chia bar Ovin and Rabbi Asi. Chad Omar, one said, Lefi she'ein ba heter achila, because it's not permissible to eat this fruit. Okay, why is that an issue? Let's take a look in Rashi. She'ein ba heter achila. V'rachamona Omar, Rashi intones, and the merciful one, a euphemism for God, for Torah, tells us, lochem. Well, v'lakachtem lochem, you should take for you. So lochem means haroi lochem, that which is suitable for you, b'chol darchei hana'ato. It has to be available for you. The Torah could have said just ulakachtem, take it. Why did it have to say lochem? And it seems reasonable to say that the dispute ultimately is about what is the meaning of the word lochem. So one opinion says lochem means that it has to be yours for all purposes of what we're going to call benefit, or a range of benefits. And eating is one of those benefits. So in this situation where you can't eat the etrog because it's orla, how could you fill a mitzvah with it? V'chad Omar, one says, Lefi she'ein ba din mamon, because it doesn't have a halachic designation, a legal status of value. What does that mean? Says Rashi, she'eino shave pruta. It isn't even worth the smallest amount, a modicum of value. Why not? Well, how are you going to benefit from it? You can't benefit from it. So who are you going to sell it to? Well, actually, whoever buys it, even if that person's not Jewish, is going to give you money for it, but you can't use that money because you can't benefit from this. So in that case, it has no value. Practically speaking, it's valueless. In theory, you might be the owner, but in practice, it's of no value. And because it's of no value, because you can't use it and you can't sell it, in that case, it doesn't have the status of value, because the status of value means that it has a price attached to it. This has no price attached to it. As Rashi continues to elaborate, the isurei hano, because it's one of those things which is asur b'hano. Hilkach, therefore, lav shalachem hu. So once again, Rashi zeroes in on the word shalachem. He says, since it doesn't have value of a shava pruta, so therefore it cannot be considered lachem. Lachem means yours. So we seem to have a dispute here about the meaning of the term lachem. In one view, the idea of lachem means that it should be of use to you. You should be able to utilize it. And here it's of no use to you. You cannot eat it. You cannot benefit from it. Another view is that it's not about using it or benefiting it, because in fact, you don't use and benefit from it anyway. But the lachem speaks to me about the fact that this has no value attached to it. And because it has no value attached to it, it might be yours, but it has to have something of value. It has to be able to be possessed. Let me give you an example. If somebody picks a blade of grass, so the blade of grass has no value, especially if you're sitting on the lawn with thousands of blades of grass. Now, is it your blade of grass if you picked it, assuming that you're sitting on the public property and people are allowed to pull up a blade of grass? So you pulled a blade of grass. I mean, technically it's yours, but it has no legal expression, this ownership. What kind of ownership is it? You own what? What do you own? There's no value attached to it. You know, there's that famous story. I think it's actually the origin is in the Gemara, but the story is told in the Middle Ages in France of this fellow who was holding his bread above a rotisserie, and the person operating the public rotisserie, he said, "Hey, pay me for the smell of my bread because the smell of my meat, which is flavoring your bread." And the poor man said, "I don't have any money." He said, "Well, I don't care. Then you can't benefit from the smell of my meat on the rotisserie, and you're enhancing your bread with that smell, and your edible enjoyment is being increased. You have to pay me." Anyway, he hauls him before the court, and the judge listens to the case, and the judge says, he says, "Very interesting. So in other words, you want to charge him for the scent of the food." And he said to this fellow, you don't have anything? He said, "Well, I have one small coin, but that's all I have." And the judge said, "Give me the coin." And the man began to cry and said, "Please, please, Your Honor, this is all I have. Give me the coin." Okay, there's no choice. Takes the coin, and the judge throws it up, and it lands, and it makes a little bit of noise. And he says, "He just paid you back for the scent of your meat with the sound of his money." That's how the story goes. So there's no value attached to this. And the question, what does lachem mean? Does it have to have value attached to it? And for this we need a modicum of value? Or does it have to have the opportunity to utilize? Meaning you have to have some kind of benefit attached to it. It's not a question of whether it is of value, but a question whether you can benefit. In different words, the way I understand what Rashi is saying. And by the way, there's a huge dispute amongst the Rishonim what the pshat here is, what the meaning of. I'll deal with this a little bit later. But I'm following the straightforward approach of the Gemara that Tzemach Tzedek says this is the pshat in the Gemara, despite the fact that Tosfos and the Ritva seem to say otherwise. Tzemach Tzedek this is the straightforward pshat. So the straightforward pshat is that the dispute is in different words. Whether we look at this in pragmatic terms, the lochem means practically, it's a description of how you relate to this item or how you might use this item, and if you don't have any possible usage or benefit from this item, then it's not really a lochem. And that was the meaning of the Torah when it said, "Lekachtam lochem," yours insofar as pragmatic use is concerned, yours insofar as practical benefit is concerned. Or, when the Torah uses the term lochem, it's not speaking about your behavior, it's not speaking about what you can do, it's speaking conceptually of whether this is the kind of thing which can be possessed. So one is kind of more subjective, whether I can use it, and one is more objectively speaking, does this have the concept of value attached to it? These are the two schools of thought. And it's like I said, it seems very clear that this is what Rashi is saying. So the Gemara says, the Gemara begins to analyze this now. Sal kadaitoch amino. Sal kadaitoch. I would have thought, man de boy heter achila, le boy din momen. That the opinion that says you have to be able to eat it. And by the way, eating doesn't only mean to chew on something or digest it. When we talk about eating, we're talking about consumption. And consumption is a term that's used for benefit. In English, colloquially speaking, the term consumption is used in a variety of ways. Not only to describe things we eat, we consume fuel. It consumes time. It's something which gets used or utilized to the point that it's no longer available because it's taken, it's being used or was used already. So heter achila means it's not yours. You can't do anything with it. So the assumption here in the Gemara was, the Gemara's initial understanding is, kasal kadaite, that the one who says that what you need is heter achila, permission to use it, leiboy din momen. It's not a question of whether it has value. The question is, can you use it? Let's take a look at Rashi now. Kasal kadaite, man de boy heter achila. Listen carefully. Ihave be heter achila, whether you are able legally. Now, this legality is a ritualistic legality from a Torah perspective, not the country you live in or its laws, but as a Torah Jew. So, ihave be heter achila, if there would be something that you could eat but don't own. Now, of course, you may be asking, what does that even mean? If I don't own it, how can I eat it? Wouldn't that be the definition of theft? So Rashi says something quite fascinating. He says, Kegoin, for example, Meiser Sheni beYerushalayim, the second tithe in Jerusalem. So the second tithe in Jerusalem, he says, Leiboi din momen, does not require ownership per se. So allow me to explain. I see Zalman is asking a question. What does it mean that after Sukkot, one can't use a lulav? Can he plant it? Why do you say you can't use a lulav? You certainly can use a lulav. Can you plant a lulav? I don't think you can. I don't think it'll grow, but you can use it. We have a custom of using these items for a mitzvah purpose. We say, since a mitzvah was done with it, so we'll try to do another mitzvah with it. So the tradition is, and it's just one of a number of traditions, that the lulav is cast into the fire with which we burn the chametz on Erev Pesach. Or if Pesach comes out, if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, the day before that. But that's only a custom. And once Sukkot ends, then you are able to do as you please. And many people eat their Etrogim. Although I've heard it's not such a good idea because they use an enormous amount of pesticides. But that aside, you can use it for your own things. You can't use it during the course of the festival because it's huktzah mitzvah. It's set aside for the purpose of a mitzvah. But this is really another subject. I'm saying because we said it's holy. Yes, we said it's holy for a week, for the week of Sukkot, not beyond. Huktzah mitzvah means it was designated or set aside for a mitzvah. And in theory, if a person were to buy a number of etrogim, he could be maktzia. He could set aside this etrog for use on this day and then eat the etrog that afternoon. And then the next day he uses a new etrog. If he designates it in that fashion, that works too. Okay, so let's talk about the second tithe. Very brief kind of overview. When we harvest grain or fruit in the land of Israel, and there's a dispute amongst the Rishonim whether this is only specific grains or fruits identified in the Torah or any kind of grain or fruit, we'll go with the Rambam's approach that it's any grain or fruit. So it's growing from a holy land. What is the meaning of a holy land, like pragmatically? Practically speaking, it means that it's a land with which we have opportunity to do mitzvot. And mitzvot are methods or mechanisms, vehicles, divinely ordained conventions through which we are privileged to bring holiness into this world and nurture a relationship with God. So Eretz HaKodesh, the Holy Land, provides us with many opportunities to do mitzvot. By the way, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu so ardently craved entry into the Holy Land, to do those mitzvot and to achieve those unique connections and actualize holiness. So the first thing is we set aside, and I'm using broad terms, we set it 2%, we set it aside for the Kohen. And then, that's called Truma. Then we set aside Meiser, a tithe, 10% of what's left, and that goes to the Levi. The Levi sets 1/10 of what he gets, 1/10 of the 10th, and that goes to the Kohen as well. So practically speaking, you have 100 bushels, 2 are given to the Kohen, now you have 98, and then you take 10%, 9.8, which is 10% of that, and then of that 9.8, 9.1 is given. Essentially, we end up, the Kohen gets a little bit under, a little bit under 3%, just about 3%, a hair under 3%. The Levi walks away with less than 10%, a little bit less than 10%. And then there's a second tithe. The Levi's tithe is taken all 6 years of the agriculture, when we're allowed to plant in the land of Israel. There's the 7th year, the year in which the field must lie fallow. So the year in which we're not permitted to work the land, obviously there's no tithes that are going to be taken. So during the years of planting, for 6 years, 1/10, 10% is set aside. After the Truma, it goes to the Levi. Then, for year 1 and 2 of the agricultural cycle in the land of Israel, another 10% is set aside. This 10% must be brought to the holy city of Yerushalayim and consumed there. And what happens if it's fruit that's going to rot if you leave it? Or maybe it's grain that's going to rot. So then the Torah tells us, v'tzarta b'kesef. You can simply turn it into silver, which is easily negotiable currency. You bring that silver to Yerushalayim, so you come with your money pouch bulging. You spend the silver on edibles in Yerushalayim, and you eat it in Yerushalayim. And there's special halachot of how this has to be consumed. Now, on the 3rd year of the agricultural cycle, in the 6th year, instead of a second tithe to be brought to Jerusalem, we give additional gifts to the poor. That's called Ma'aser Ani. So, we have a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to eat, to bring this Ma'aser Sheni to Yerushalayim and to eat it there. The question is it really mine? So, for example, if I choose to spend it on something that I want to spend it on, let's say, for example, you can achieve the bond of marriage by virtue of handing valuables, something of value. And a man hands something of value to a woman and he says, I hereby marry you. Or even, if you want to be the technical language, acquire you. My jurisdiction will acquire your jurisdiction. So that if she's a non-Kohen, she becomes a Kohen, for example. My jurisdiction is going to acquire by virtue of this valuable. The exchange of consideration is what creates the bond of marriage. Now, we use a ring, a gold ring. That's very nice. The reason we don't use a diamond ring is because diamonds fluctuate. And there are beautiful diamonds that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and simple diamonds that cost just a few $1,000s. And it's possible sometimes for a cubic zirconium, which is worth literally a handful of dollars, to mimic a diamond that's worth an enormous amount of money. They're getting so good at these, sometimes the experts themselves have difficulty telling them apart. And what if a woman finds out that she got a cubic zirconium, or she finds out she got a flawed diamond, but she thought it was a gorgeous diamond? And she says, I wasn't prepared to enter into marriage for that. Well, we have a problem on our hands. So she has to know the approximate value. A gold ring is a gold ring. If he presents a ring as gold and it's actually not gold, we have a problem. What if he gives her a slice of bread? He says, I hereby marry you with this slice of bread. And she says, I'm hungry. Thank you. And she takes a slice of bread. Are they married? The answer is yes. Now the question is, I'm in Yerushalayim. I have a date, a fig, a slice of bread. That's Meiser Sheni. And the man takes that and gives it to a woman and he says, I hereby marry you with this glass of wine. Which is actually the example our sages use. There's a glass of wine. Is she married? So there's a dispute about this. But as Rashi is going to tell us, and we'll soon see in the Gemara, that one opinion is, in the Gemara Masechet Kedushin, on page 52 tells us, Rabbi Meir says, it actually doesn't belong to you, which means you couldn't affect a marriage with it, but you have a mitzvah to eat it. So according to Rabbi Meir, the Meiser Sheni is Mammon Gavoyahu. It's God's money. We're eating on God's account. It's not my money. It's not yours. Ve'eno nichse hedyet. It does not belong, it is not the residuals of a commoner. It's the royal residuals. It's God's residual. So therefore, it's not yours, l'kadesh bo'isha, to get married to a woman. It's not kosher lotzed bo. You can't affect that. It doesn't work with this. So if we say it doesn't work with this, so in that case, what happens now is, if we require something that has value, inherent value, this doesn't actually have value. It has value, but not to me. It can't be owned by me, but I can eat it. So in the first approach, we would say, I can use an Etrog of Meiser Sheni, because I can eat it in Yerushalayim. And from the second approach, that it has to have inherent value to me, which means that I can actually sell it and the money belongs to me, I wouldn't be able to do this mitzvah. So Rashi says, the assumption here was that the Meiser Sheni, according to Rabbi Meir, would necessarily mean that you can only fulfill the mitzvah according to the first opinion, who says that we need boi heter achila, but le boi din mammon. It doesn't say heter mammon, it says din mammon. And that's where the Tzemach Tzedek says that the Ritva and the Tosfos are very hard for him to see, or even the Rashba, because it says din mammon. Din means it has to have legal status as valuable. And that's why it has no legal status as valuable, because you can't affect a marriage. It doesn't really belong to you. So in that case, according to the first opinion, you could still fulfill the mitzvah of Arba Minim, of the 4 kinds on Sukkot. However, the Gemara continues to say, Uman de boy din mamen. Our assumption was that the one who requires this rule of status, of value, loy boy heter achila, does not require the need to eat it, as long as it is of value, even if I can't eat it. You're going to say, 1 second, what do you mean? If it's of value, if I own it, why can't I eat it? So the Gemara is going to tell us. I'll tell you how. Umachasher, says Rashi, he would permit, he said it would be suitable to use an etrog shel tevel. What is tevel? Tevel is the harvest before any tithes are taken. By the way, tevel is prohibited from consumption because it has the sacred food of truma mixed into it. So I'm not allowed to eat tevel. It's a violation of the Torah to eat tevel, yet it belongs to me. Well, you say, if you can't eat it, in what way does it belong to you? Rashi tells us very simple. Muter bahana. It's permissible for one to derive benefit from it. What could that benefit be? Well, I have to give it to the Kohen, I have to give it to the Levi, I have to give it to the poor person. I get to choose. I choose the Kohen. And in theory, what would happen if a man would say to a woman, I'd like to marry you. And I'll do so that on the condition with the benefit or the delight you receive by me giving my very, very significant endowment of Truma. I've got about $20,000 worth of crops here. And I'm going to transfer it to your family or to somebody, to your brother, somebody you care about. But I want you to be married to me with the benefit you derive to be the one to direct my charity. This is an actual benefit which works in today's day and age with tzedakah. The money that you are supposed to give to charitable purposes, which, by the way, according to halacha, 10% of one's earnings has to be given to tzedakah. It's actually not your money. If you don't give tzedakah, you're stealing from Hashem's account. It's not yours. So the question is, can anybody who runs a charity come and just take it? And the answer is no. I have the right to decide how I want to dispense of it. Do I want to support a synagogue? That's my right. Do I want to support a school? That's my right. Do I want to support a soup kitchen? That's my right. I have the right to decide how I spend my money. How I spend my money insofar as my charitable dollars are concerned. Many years ago, I heard a very famous Jewish magnate. They say he was a billionaire. I think his name was Peter Monk. He owned one of the largest mining companies in Canada called Barrick Gold. So he said, he's passed on since, but when he was entering his twilight years, he said that all my life I've been doing things for everybody else. And now, he says, I'm not interested in making money anymore. I mean, the man couldn't have spent the money he made even if he wanted to anymore. He said, but in my final years, I'm going to be deciding how to give my money away. And that, he said, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I am going to give it my way to support the things I want to support. And he did. And he did. It was very interesting. I'll leave it at that. The point is that it is possible for me to have benefit from something that I'm not permitted to eat. Is it your charity dollars? No, you can't buy your groceries with that charity money. But you can decide. You do have the benefit of deciding who you give it to. It's not your food right now. The truma, the harvest has truma mixed into it. It's not allowed to be eaten by you. So if I have an etrog of Tevel, I didn't take the truma, may I fulfill the mitzvah with that etrog? Well, if we say you need to be able to eat it, the answer is no. But if I say that I need to be able to benefit from it, it needs to be owner, it has to have a status of value. There is a status of value. In fact, there's a fascinating halacha, which is a Kohen is not allowed to go to somebody and say, you know, I'll pay you for the truma. I know you have a lot of truma, and my family needs it. So here's $100 and give me $1,000 worth of truma. At least you got $100. A Kohen's not allowed to do that. However, I can go over. I'm not a Kohen. I can go over to somebody and say, you know, I know you have a big harvest. So there's this Kohen that really needs the gift, and I'm prepared to make a gift to you. If you'll direct the gift to him, I may do that. So the person actually benefited. That's a very real, practical benefit. So this was the assumption that the Gemara made. This was the opening assumption that the Gemara made. And now the Gemara is going to come back with a very powerful question. A question that will demonstrate that this assumption is incorrect. Just going to check here for a minute to see if we have any questions. Kevin is saying a land that is transparent. I'm assuming you mean you're referring to my comment about Eretz Yisrael. Well, it's actually not that simple. It's not that simple, Kevin, because you can't say that you go to Eretz Yisrael and you see holiness. And there's a lot of people living in Eretz Yisrael who aren't behaving properly. But we can say that the mitzvot are always available there. This is a much larger subject, and it's not for now. So the Gemara comes now and says, stop right there. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, and here's the thing. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Asi, these are not rabbis of the Mishnah genre. They're not Tanaim. They're Amoraim of the Gemara genre. And they can't dispute a clear Mishnah. And this is all, at this point, hypothetical. We're trying to understand the reasoning, the logic, the jurisprudence behind this ruling in the Mishnah about the Etrog of Arla. But we have a Mishnah that says, Shel Truma Tmeya, if you have an Etrog, which is Truma, but it's Truma which is ritually impure, which may not be eaten. It's a sin to eat Truma, which is ritually impure. Shal truma tmeya psula, or the other version is pasul, because truma tmeya, the right tense is not psula but pasul. So the Gemara says, you see, that truma, if it's non-edible, is unfit for the fulfillment of this mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Bishlei melamanda amar, this would work well, this is at peace with the opinion, she'ein ba heter achila, that if you can't eat it, you can't fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Shapir, that's good, that's beautiful. Elamanda amar, according to the opinion, lefi she'ein ba din mamain, that it doesn't have status, it doesn't have value. What do you mean it doesn't have value? Amai, why would you say that? Why is it unfit for the fulfillment of the mitzvah? Harei masika tachas tafshilei. You can use it for fuel. As Rashi is going to tell us, man de boy din momen le boy heter achila. Sorry, leman dam lefishein bodin momen aval heter achila le beinon. The one who says, as long as there's a status of value, that's good enough. You don't actually have to eat it. So why is the truma that is ritually impure not fit for the mitzvah? Umishum din mamein karinan be'lachem. If you're going to say that the meaning of lachem, v'lakachtem lachem, is that you have a status of something which is honorable. I know that's not a word, but you know what I mean. Something of value. It has a legal status of something which can be owned, which can be lachem, which could be possessed in a legalistic way. So there is value. Hare masika lazu tachas tafshilei kidam rinon. And here Rashi invokes a fascinating Gemara in Masechet Shabbat on page 25. It's a chapter of the Gemara that speaks about the kindling of Shabbat candles, and it goes off into a discussion of the kindling of Hanukkah candles. And over there is a question about truma and about using truma, which is ritually impure. And the Gemara says that we have a teaching, and the teaching is titein lo, that the truma that's given should be given to the Kohen. Titein lo, the Gemara says. Velola oro, don't give it to him for the use as on a fire. Give it to him for the use, so to speak, of whatever people tend to use it for. In other words, if you give him truma, which is tamei, so suppose you separate from a harvest that which is ritually impure, and you give it to the Kohen. You say, well, he can use it as fuel. He can make ethyl alcohol out of the corn. So go ahead, knock yourself out. Or you can use the wheat, and you can fire up your oven. He said, well, that's not really very helpful. I mean, it's of some value, but very little value. If all it is fuel, it's not worth much. So therefore, the Gemara says, do not take the truma from the ritually impure. Rather, take it from that which is ritually pure. Now, as Rashi says, what can we derive from this? Clearly, we can see that there is permissibility to incinerate the truma, which is tamei, which is ritually impure, and it's of value. It's just that the Gemara says that's not the value that Torah was speaking about when the Torah said, give the Kohen truma. That's not the value. It is value, some value. It's not the value we were referring to. So clearly, miklal, the bat orohu, it is of value. Bat oro literally means the daughter of light, but it means for the purpose of light. He may use it for that purpose. So in that case, the Mishnah doesn't seem to make any sense. So our supposition that the opinion was either one approach is you have to be able to use it, and the other approach was it has to be of value, to be defined as of value. This doesn't seem to work with the Mishnah. And so our Gemara concedes that our supposition was actually incorrect. It couldn't have been correct. And the Gemara says, so really, it turns out that kuli alma le pligi. Nobody is arguing the be'inan that you need to have something which is beheter achila kuli alma le pligi de be'inan. You have to be able to eat it, and if you can't eat it, it's not fit for the mitzvah. Ki pligi. When was there a discussion? Bedin momin, when it doesn't have the status of a possession. It doesn't have value per se. You can eat it, but it doesn't have value. Mar savar heter achila binan. The first opinion is, as long as I can eat it, even if I can't own it per se, lochem means I can use it, so that's good enough. As long as I can pragmatically use it, even if I don't technically own it per se. And din momin lebinan. Umar savar. The other school of thought is din momin nami binan. That you have to have not only the permissibility to eat it, but you also have to have ownership. Like a legal definition of ownership, it has to be something which is of value, something which is of a legal status of something that can be possessed. So the Gemara says like semantics. My binayu, what's the difference? And the Gemara says ika binayu. There is daylight between these two schools of thought. And the daylight would be Meiser Sheni, the second tithe, and Rashi quoted this earlier, and I shared it with you already. Meiser Sheni, Shabirushalayim, the second tithe in the city of Jerusalem, Aliba de Rabbi Meir, according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and the Gemara spells it out now. Laman da Omar Lafisha Eimba Heterachila, the opinion that says that the only thing that's required is the ability to eat, and you can fulfill the mitzvah. Harei yesh ba heterachila. So what's the problem? You need to be able to eat it, and you can eat it. In fact, take the Etrog, use it for today, and have in mind, take a new Etrog for tomorrow, and eat it this afternoon. That's fine. But Laman Damar Lefisha Din Momin, can I be Mekadesh and Isha? Can I go and effect a marriage with this? Well, not really, because it doesn't belong to me. It's Momin Govei, according to Rabbi Meir. It belongs to God. It's God's residuals. I have permission to eat it. God gives me permission to eat which belongs to Him. In that case, so then it's not going to be fit for the performance of the mitzvah because it's Ma'aser Sheni Momen Gavoyo. That's money, so to speak, that comes from a higher place. So this is really the straightforward way of learning the Gemara, and the truth is that the Tosfos takes exception to this approach, and he says this doesn't seem to make any sense. One of the questions that the Tosfos has, he says, what do you do with arla fruit? So when we deal with contraband, there's something called min hanikbarim and min hanisrafim. Some things have to be incinerated or burnt, and some things can be buried. So the higher level of prohibited contraband has to be burnt. Why? So that nobody should make the mistake of using it. It shouldn't serve as, if you will, a stumbling block. So Tosfos says, so then it has to get burnt. If it has to get burnt, why is this different than the previous halachot? Last episode was something that has to be burnt. Doesn't exist. This also has to be burnt. That's the big question that Tosfos asks. And because of this, Tosfos goes in another direction. So the Tzemach Tzedek, in his Chidushim on Shas, and this is on Masechet Sukkah and Daf Ayin Aleph on Medalad, the Tzemach Tzedek says, he brings down the question of the Tosfos. He says, what? If you have the Esek Shel Arlo, the Michtes Shiure, it's lacking a volume. It's lacking size as we described it. And I'm not going to go back to this. Go back to the last episode and watch it if you want greater clarity if you missed it. The Mitzvahs b'sreifa, it has to be burned. So in that case, what's going on here? This is something that was resolved already last week, so to speak, in our previous episode. Why does the Gemara say my time? We know the reason. And Tosfos comes along with whatever his reasons are. And the Ran follows this approach. And the Ritva also does. The Rashba actually does. The Rambam doesn't, the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't quote it here, but the Rashba in his Tshuvas also follows this approach. And Tzemach Tzedek says, Lefi ani daiti, with all due respect, Zehu neged pshat ha-Gemara kan. This contradicts the straightforward understanding of the Gemara. Because the Gemara is asking a separate question. And the Gemara is asking my time. And if it's the same reason as before, the way Tosfos learns it is not the straightforward reading of the Gemara. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that here is my suggestion, that you can easily make a difference between the Asherah Esrog, the Esrog that's harvested from an oracle or gleaned from a forbidden city. Because over there, mitzvahs asay lisraif. It is a positive mitzvah in the Torah to burn it. So when the Torah says that we are mandated, because mitzvahs aren't electives in truth. I mean, practically, you can choose to do a mitzvah or not, chas v'shalom, but really it's not an elective. It's not a cute thing. If you want to, sure, knock yourself out. We're obligated to do mitzvahs. When the Torah places that mandate upon us, then it doesn't exist. Halachically, this doesn't exist, because Torah says it has no right to exist. But when we talk about klai hakerem, the prohibited mixture, and we talk about erla, so it's not biblically ordained for us to burn it. We burn it because we don't want somebody to stumble on it, but it isn't a mitzvah per se. And because Torah doesn't legislate its burning as a mitzvah, as a commandment, it does exist. It should be burnt, but it does exist. And the Tzemach Tzedek proves his point because he says that foodstuff, edibles, can become ritually impure. That's known as tumas eichelin. And the halacha is that for foodstuff to become ritually impure, a modicum size is required, the size of an egg, kebetza, or kebeya. And that's actually more than the etrog. It's larger than the size of the etrog. And yet, because as we talked about, the etrog doesn't really have a shear. Etrog's shear is that it should be noticeable, that it should be a fruit. It's not a volume size per se. And we talked about this with a diuk, a precise analysis of the language used in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and the Achtam Sofer. Again, in the previous episode, we elaborated on this. So therefore he says, the Asherah and the Ir Nidachat is obligated to be burnt. And that's why it can't become tummy with tumas eichlin. It can't become ritually defiled. However, the arla can become ritually defiled, even though you can't eat it. So he says, and even though you're supposed to burn it. But the fact that it can become ritually defiled means it is inedible right now. And because of this, he says, so we have a situation where there's ostensibly, there is an etrog here. Yes, you should burn it, it's arla, but can you fulfill the mitzvah? And that's what the Gemara says, my time. And the Gemara's answer is that because you can't eat it, you can't fulfill the mitzvah. And Tzemach Tzedek says that technically speaking, this would make a difference between the first day of Sukkot and the latter days, because as a rule, the terminology of v'lakachtem lachem is only b'yom harishon. So the idea of lachem is only the first day. And therefore, there's a huge difference whether we learn the Gemara the way Rashi is learning it, learn like Tosfos, it's a difference between the first day and the latter days. And the Rashba actually says this in his Tshuvas. So in Tshuva 746 of Chelik Aleph, he actually says that. He said that would be a difference. So this is the way we've learned it. And so on a practical level, what happens here? Like what's actually the halacha? So I want to share with you. Let's take a look in the Rambam. The Rambam says, listen to the language the Rambam uses. This is it's like stunning. The Rambam says an etrog of arla or of truma tmeya, which is the truma that is tamei. So if it's tamei, if it's ritually impure, it can't be eaten, but that has value. Or if it's tevel, so the Rambam says pasul. Pasul. It's disqualified. Why? Because it can't be eaten. How do I know that's the reason? Because the Rambam says if it's demai is grain that we're not sure if the tithes were taken. Now we know that the first tithe was taken, the truma, but the second tithe, because it was given to the Levite, people took certain leniencies and they didn't realize that there was truma mixed into it. So the sages ordained that you have to take an additional tithe. But if you're impoverished, if you're poor, the sages didn't make that mandate. So he says a person who's rich can still fulfill his mitzvah with an etrog of demai. Why? Because in theory, he could give all his money away and then be poor. So it's possible for him to be able to eat it. And we see from here that it boils down to being able to eat it. That's the bottom line. in the Levush, which is one system of codes, it says that the psulim, which are because there's a damage in the items, that's a problem which can only be maybe on the first day, not the other days. But he says the psulim, the disqualification that comes because of prohibition. For example, idolatry, last week's episode. Or because etrog asur ba'achila, it's prohibited for consumption. For example, orla, he says. Or because he brings in other varieties of reasons of what, things like orla. So he says in that case, psulin bein b'yom harishon bein b'shara yomim. Because you can't eat it. You can't eat it on the first day. You can't eat it on the sixth day. You can't ever eat it. And because eating is the defining hallmark here. And that's the reason, not because it's missing a shiur. So the Levush clearly rules that this would be asur. And we can see it's because of the concept of the edibles, and the edible here, that is the actual reason, not because it's lacking a shiur. In the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tafresh Memtes, which is chapter 649 in the laws of Lulav, it says that if the disqualification is mishum avodat elilim, because of idolatry, or mepnei she'oto etrog asur ba'achila, because that etrog is prohibited to eat, in that case, so then it's pasul. And this is true, he says, on the first day and on the other days. The Magen Avraham, in his commentary is Sukkot and Chaf, and in subsection 20, the Magen Avraham says that it's pretty clear that the Shulchan Aruch rules that even though it's permissible for a person to benefit in some way, but if he's not allowed to eat it, that's it. That's the defining hallmark. Can you eat it? If you can't eat it, it's not kosher. So he says, let me ask you a question, he says, what about the lulav? What about the lulav? The lulav, he says, after all, if the etrog can't be owned, the lulav can't be owned either. If it's both lacking, why did we say the lulav is missing a shiur? And the Magen Avraham says, I'll tell you why. Because you can't eat a lulav, but you can eat an etrog. You can't eat willows, you can't eat myrtles, you can't eat palm branches, but you can eat an etrog. And here the emphasis is dafke gabe etrog, is specifically the etrog, which is ra'ui la'achilu, which could be edible. That's where we use the word lachem, that darshinon lachem, shalachem yehe la'ochloi, that it has to be yours for the purpose of practical usage, like eating it. And that's why our sages prohibited it. Why? Because it is inherently disqualified. Whereas the lulav, he says, "Eni roi la'achila." To begin with, the whole thing doesn't apply. And then he asks a very interesting question, the Magen Avraham says. So what if it's orla, but outside of Eretz Yisrael? And he says that there is an opinion that orla, the 3 years outside of Israel, only if you know for sure that it's from orla is it asur. But you can give it to somebody else and you don't have to tell him anything. And he can fulfill the mitzvah. And he's allowed to eat it. And Magen Avraham discusses this, and he says, that seems reasonable to me. Because somebody else could eat it, so it's edible, even if you can't eat it because you know it's from the third year, you actually can rely on this leniency for the etrog. And by the way, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in chapter 649, in subsection 15, Seif Tezvav, says very clearly, Etrog she'ein roi la'achila, an etrog which cannot be eaten. For example, Tevel, the fruit or produce from Israel that hasn't been tithed yet, shall orla, from the 3 years, is pasul kol zayin hayom. It's disqualified all 7 days of Sukkot. Shenemar, because it's written, ulakachtem lochem. And at the outset of today's class, I said the discussion is, what is the meaning of lochem? V'dorshu chachamim, our sages expounded. What is the meaning of lochem? What is the meaning of take it for you? Haroi lochem lechol darkei hanaosei. That which is usable or suitable for you to benefit from. The etrog shederach hana'ato hu achila. The etrog, the normal thing to do with an etrog is to eat it. So tzarech liyot roi la'achila. It has to be edible. So the lachem is talking about any kind of benefit. But because this is the primary benefit, it is an edible. If you can't eat it, then what? Even if you can find something else to do with it, if you can't even eat it, then it'll be purposeless. You have to be able to eat it. And the Alter Rebbe says, what about an etrog of Orla, the first 3 years outside of Eretz Yisrael? It's also prohibited to eat. The Rebbe says, Mikol Mokim, Mikivan Sheyesh Matirim, there are those who permit to eat an Orla outside of Eretz Yisrael because you're allowed to give it to your friend and you're not obligated to tell him it's Orla. So it is suitable for eating. There is a halachic way for it to be eaten. And even though the halacha is not like this, and even though we're not supposed to do that, nonetheless, Yesh Lismech al Devrei Lahachshir HaEtrog LeMitzvah. For the etrog to become a mitzvah, that kind of achila, as long as there is a halachic way for it to be eaten, that's considered to be an edible, and once it's an edible, we can fulfill the mitzvah with it. So, the upshot is that we now have clarity. I see we have a question here. Salman is asking, so an etrog that is orla, forbidden to eat, we can use for the mitzvah, we can give it to someone else, and they can't eat it after Sukkot because it regains its orla status. No, that is not correct. According to one opinion, which, by the way, we don't follow that opinion, but according to a halachic opinion, one is permitted to give an etrog of outside of Israel, chutz la'aretz orla, to somebody else, and they may eat it anytime. And because they may eat it anytime, that's why we're allowed to fulfill the mitzvah with that etrog on Sukkot. So, that's our next episode, and that's the forbidden fruit. Somebody wanted to know why I put a picture of apples. Well, because that was the graphics I found on forbidden fruit. But the point really is, the point wasn't forbidden fruit as in original sin. The point of forbidden fruit is that the Torah actually prohibits certain fruits. And if it's forbidden fruit, it can't be used for the mitzvah. All right, I hope this has clarified and helped you appreciate the concept of the etrog. Thank you for joining this evening. I'm grateful for your online participation. Unfortunately, nobody came tonight, but you guys were here online, and that's important, and it's appreciated. Please like and share and comment, and let's continue to share words of Torah. May Hashem help us that we should merit, be'ezrat Hashem, to fulfill the mitzvah of ulakachtam lachem in the Beit HaMikdash this year, the way Sukkot is supposed to be, with the coming of Mashiach b'mheira u'b'yameinu. Amen. Thank you for joining. Have a beautiful night.